Hello, everybody. This is the weekly lore call for Atheros for the. Let's see, what week is this? It would be for the week of October 18, 2021. It's currently Saturday the 23rd right now. I'm going to hop into the Hangout channel. So there might be some people talking. So, just to let you guys know as you're listening, you might walk into somebody's conversation. Here we go. Hello. Oh, wait, hang on a second. Of course. I changed my output device. There we go. Now I can hear everybody. How's it going, everybody?
Hi.
Hi, hey. How you doing? Good?
Suppose tired.
Good. Well, I guess I'm just going to go ahead and get kind of rolling with the voice or the lore chat here. Anybody have any questions they want to start off with? I kind of went through questions and got some more recent questions about the lore that I can answer. If nobody has anything right now.
Not really now. Yeah, I had one, but then I forgot about it. So it'll come back to me.
Yeah, sure. If you ever have a question that you want me to answer during one of the calls, you can always send it to me in a message, and I can answer it that way. Or you can just ask in questions and say that you want me to elaborate a little bit on one of the lore chats, and I can do that. All right, well, I'm just going to jump into one of the topics here. A lot of folks lately have been asking about the Crimson King, and kind of what's going on with the Crimson King, where he comes from, who the senari are, kind of like a little bit about him and his followers, if you will. So the Crimson King, he appeared it would be in the lore, about 750 years ago, just over 700 years. He and his people, they all appeared kind of at the same time in the southern seas of Atheros. They appeared on some ships. They arrived. Turns out that they were exiled from their homeland. It is still, in the lore anyways, it is unclear as to whether or not that homeland was some other world on Atheros, or if it's some other planar area. So that is still kind of up for debate, if you will. It could be that they were some sort of fiendish race that was already on the primary material plane here in Atheros, or it could be that they were from a more ordered level of Avernus. So, but either way, they're a fiendish race that were exiled from their homeland after the Crimson King instigated a war with that land's god emperor. So they were another race from another place. The Crimson King started a civil war there and lost. So he and his followers were exiled from that land. And they ended up in Atheros. There were, rather, at the same time, there was an island chain created in the southern seas called the Ashwind Isles. And they settled those kind of ashy volcanic islands there. All in all, the senari, they're a race of tall, slender, red-skinned humanoids. They tend to have less hair than humans. They tend to value intellectual traits, so cunning, guile, deception, things along those lines. But they're not necessarily known for their martial prowess. They're much more prone to magic than to martial warfare. That's not to say that none of them can swing a sword. There are some swashbuckling senari out there who sail along with the sea whacks and who can swing a sword like the best of them. But more often than not, if a senari is going to learn a deadly art, they'll lean towards magic as opposed to the martial arts. Um,
But they do
so,
have their Crimson Pact, which applies their martial abilities.
the blood sacrifice. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the root of the blood sacrifice is, again, the senari. They definitely try to cloak a lot of what they do. They are a fiendish, devilish race. Um, I mean, their love of spice was influenced by Dune. This was influenced like back in 2016, though. This isn't the whole new like the new Dune craze. Um, so I mean, they use addictive drugs in order to enhance their magical ability. They also use blood in order to enhance their magical abilities. But they're not going around, saying, "Oh, we're a bunch of blood magic druggies." Um, they're a very kind of like charismatic cloak and dagger sort of race. There's a reason why they have this large sprawling merchant empire, and that's to keep the spice moving. And it's also one of the reasons why they don't take a side in the East versus West, Empire versus the Freelands war. Number one, because they kind of support slavery tacitly because it means they have a much easier source of labor and blood. But number two, because as long as that friction is there and that conflict is there, they can take advantage of it. So let's say, the Empire loses some territory, right? That means that the Imperial supply lines have been cut. Well, before whatever allied power is there can institute their own supply lines, the senari merchants are already in place, ready to take up the slack that the Imperials left behind. And the reverse is true when the Empire takes over territory. However, the Empire usually ends up running their own business just because they're much more powerful and centralized. But yeah, I mean, the senari on both sides kind of can take advantage of the conflict. They can trade slaves with the Empire, and they can trade everything else with the folks in the East. And yeah, they're packed with the Crimson King. That whole blood sacrifice thing, absolutely. I think it's a pretty, just talking mechanically, I think it's a pretty good way to be able to empower your attack in some sort of limited way. Not much expends your hit dice besides just using them in a short rest. And then it's also limited by the use of your reaction, so you can't pump it multiple times in a turn. And, also, hey, if you try doing it all the time, it's still limited by your hit dice. So you can only use it as many times in a long rest as you have hit dice. And then at the end of that long rest, you still only get half your hit dice back. So, yeah. So I think it's a good ability. So about 15 years ago, just after the end of the war with Glacia, the Crimson King created a kind of like a small army of divine construct angels called the Brass Heralds. And they pretty much stick to the Ashwind Isles. They don't really leave the Senari lands much, but they're made to enforce his rule. More or less what's happening right now in Greater Senari culture is this. It's been about 3 full generations since the Crimson King took power, or not took power, but I guess reinstated power here in the Ashwind Isles. That first generation, it was full of sycophants and true loyalists who left along with him or who were exiled along with him and had nothing else. The folks in the second generation were kind of similarly loyal, but a lot of the loyalties that they have were inherited from their parents. They never saw the Crimson King's power back in the home isles, so to speak. It's just, the Crimson King, he is this great and powerful warrior mage. He knows all these secret spells that he teaches only to his, closest acolytes, things along those lines. But as that second generation grows up and grows older, they start to see, like, as we kind of mentioned before, that mercantile empire that's there in Atheros, and the power that can be had not just through magic, but through money and through connections with the other races. So you have quite a few Senar who end up, I guess, kind of traveling the world a little bit more. And they don't value necessarily the opulence of the city of brass and the wealth and power of the Crimson King. They start to learn more about, especially the ones that are out there hunting the ley liners out in the Horseshoe Plains. They're out there seeking the ley liner deposits, and then also the ley liners themselves. There was even a city called Gaidi Prime, which was founded just to extract the ley liner juice, if you will. In fact, let's see if I can look into that a little bit more. I'll just pulled it up here because I'm trying to remember everything about Gaidi Prime. Okay, here we go. Yeah, exactly. I'm trying to remember when it was destroyed. Okay, so Gaidi Prime actually was destroyed pretty recently, 30 era, so it was just about 40 years ago. This is when Ahuhi-Teroa went crazy, when he went mad. I think we talked about that briefly in that first lore conversation. But yeah, I mean, pretty much for all the time before that, so I mean, that was 40 years ago, and when was it founded? So it was only there for about 30 years, because it was founded just before 60-30 era, and destroyed just before. See, now I'm trying to find here, when did the worm calling Senari actually come about? When did the true rebels... Okay, so they learned about spice early at the beginning of the Third Era. Okay, here we go. So yeah, so it was the Senar who fled the disaster of Gaidi Prime. So yeah, about just under 100 years ago, so about 90 years ago, the Senar form a city called Gaidi Prime in the Horseshoe Plains that they used to process the worms for spice. 30 years after it's founded, Ahuhi-Teroa goes crazy. He crushes Gaidi Prime. And the Senar who flee the city develop a strange new sense, and they form a psychic relationship with ley liners. They, rather than worshiping the Crimson King, they form kind of this bond with these giant land worms, if you will. They're pretty much purple worms. And they move along with them in nomadic tribes. So rather than slaughtering the ley liner, they live along with it with all the resources, because it's said in the lore before this point that the ley liners leave behind a trail of valuable material as well, kind of similar to a flail snail, if you know that monster. So they're thinking, hey, rather than kill the ley liner for the spice, why don't we just follow it and live off of it and live in its wake and be nomads, live like the Oglela did, and do in some cases. Not all Oglela live in Yggdrasil. Some do live nomadically still. And so a few years after that, the worm-speaking Senar form deeper bonds with the ley liners. They start to become an actual psionic race, while the Senar that are loyal to the Crimson King are advanced in void magic. So right around the same time, this is in 130 era, so about 30 years ago, you start to see a real difference in the two races. You have the brass Senar, who are loyal to the Crimson King, who are worshiping, void magic as kind of the third piece in their arsenal. They've got spice, they've got blood magic, and now they've got void magic as well. While the brass Senar, not the brass Senar, those are the brass Senar. While the sand Senar are developing psionics as they form connections with the psychic ley liners. So let's see here. So after that, Ozma appears and elevates the psychic bond between the leyliners and the sand sonar that melts them into a symbiotic species. Shai-Hulud gives the worm speakers the ability to live solely off the land and the mana of the leyliners. Ozma also created oases underground that let the sand sonar grow in a subterranean environment, and where they also started to clash with Underdark cultures. So at this point, the Sand Sonar, who were kind of an overland race in the Horseshoe Plains, become a somewhat Underdark race. There you have it. At that point, that's when they really start believing they're a free people, and they sever all ties with the City of Brass. They're no longer adherents to the Crimson King or his philosophy. Instead, they decide that they're going to live on their own in this area with the power that Ozma has given them, and they're going to protect the leyliners that are there. So the leyliners start kind of migrating towards that area as well, because they're being protected from the brass sonar by the sand sonar. So that's one of the reasons why senari trading is so prevalent right now, is because the brass sonar are trying to get a hold of the spice, which the sand sonar are protecting all the leyliners. So yeah, the whole smuggling mission that you're doing with Lana, spice is actually illegal in Honua. Its trade and its consumption, though not its possession, but its trade and its consumption are illegal. So it pretty much nobody here has it. But that's what the pirates and the smuggler are trading. They're trading spice. That's what Lana is trying to interrupt there. Stop the spice trade and then turn it into the consulate. And then meanwhile, the smuggler's like, I was just holding that. You know, I can hold that. There's nothing wrong with holding it, right? So, anyways. So that's let's see here. A lot starts happening with the sonar, kind of like in the recent histories here. So let's see here. Yeah, about 5 years after that, the brass sonar, they need a new city for spice harvesting, right? Because Gaidi Prime got destroyed. So they create a new city near the foot of Everor called Irontown. You could probably see that on the map if you really squint and look closely. They also send an army there to reinforce it. So the senari do have, in addition to the naval power in the area with the Seahawk privateers, they do also have Irontown not far away. So there are quite a few merchant caravans that come in on land that are predominantly senari. Probably, 3 or 4 times a month, you see a predominantly senari caravan roll into Honua from Irontown. So let's see. So Irontown, it looks like, is also somewhat of an what would you call that? An embassy, a continental embassy for the Senar. As they send diplomatic representatives from Irontown, not only to the Worm Speakers, so to the Sand Sonar, their kind of self-exiled brethren, but also to the Grand Covenant, which is for here some reason called the Grand Conclave. But that's okay, happens. The Grand Covenant, the Glacian Empire, because that's when they were still the Glacian Empire, the Dwarves, and the Serpent People. They're called the Iron Hearts here, but let's face it, it's the Serpent People. But basically they are sending delegations to the 4 major trade powers of the continent: the Grand Covenant, the Glacian Empire, the Dwarves, and the Iron Hearts. The Bond of the Rising Sun isn't even mentioned because, Honua is the trade power of the Bond of the Rising Sun, and they don't even need to send representatives to there. Of course, Honua is going to want to trade with them. So, yeah. So that's why the Senari don't have like an official sort of embassy or ambassador here or anything like that. They don't need it. Okay, so let's see here if they do anything else in the recent history. Okay, so here we go. So shortly after that, about 115 Third Era, right now the Sennar have been kind of in this holding pattern, waiting for some sort of opportunity. And in 115 Third Era, that's when Glacia is deposed. She's taken down. And when she's taken down, the Empire actually loses territory. It's the first time historically it's ever happened. And they lose quite a bit of territory. They lose their kind of like their economic capital, if you will, and that's surrendered to the Grand Covenant. So the Crimson King sees this collapse of the Glacian Empire as an opportunity, perhaps the greatest opportunity that he's seen thus far in Atheros for market expansion. So he commands his people to take advantage of the situation, right, by aggressively expanding the trade networks of the senari in the west, and also in the east, but mostly in the west, because that's where the Empire's power is. So that way, in that area, if you're looking at the map, you can see to the west, there's like a big canyon next to a mountain. It's called the Great Rift. And that area just to the north of it, to the north and to the east of that rift, that's the area that the Empire ceded to the Grand Covenant. So the Crimson King takes advantage of that strip as well, in order to provide commodities, services, essentials, that sort of thing to the different war-strapped markets there. So it provides to the Sennar and to the Crimson King not only that immediate economic boon, but it also gives them a sustained investment over time that allows them to kind of have some more senari control in the area. Because, again, that conflict between East versus West is always going to continue. They don't want to part in the conflict necessarily. They just want to be able to take a larger share of, the neutral party, the third side, until eventually, they are the majority party, or at least as far as the power goes. So at this point, too, this is when the creator of the Sennar actually spent points to advance them in economic colonialism, just due to their long-term efforts in doing this in both the East and the West. So about 15 years ago is when the Crimson King and the Senari people were kind of seen worldwide as the unparalleled masters of economic colonialism, even more so than the Empire, because the Empire, at this time anyways, wasn't really participating in any sort of colonialism. It was just bonking people on the heads and taking their money. Later, it would actually be doing imperialism, but we can talk about the Empire later. So that's kind of what the Brass Sennar were doing right there, right as the war ended. The folks in the West, the Empire, they were trying to figure out, well, what the hell are we going to do? Folks in the East, they were celebrating, finally Glacia's dead after 700, 800 years. But the Sennar, Crimson King, they were just thinking, well, how do we take advantage of this situation? And they did so by just taking up the slack in the different markets that were there. So that's pretty much where the Senari are and where they kind of stay until we get to the time where we're at right now. In the near future here, there will be an avatar of the Sand Senari who rises called Two Rock. And he basically is trying to stand up for his people's freedom and so forth and this and that, and stand against the Crimson King. But I'd say one of the biggest takeaways for culture as far as inside the Senari culture to know is that because of the heresy, if you will, of the Sand Sennar, the Crimson King has a much more stricter doctrine these days. You either adhere wholly to the Crimson King and what he says in his word and senari law, and if you don't, then the Brass Heralds hunt you down. And coming up here in the near future, there will be an organization called the Brass Hand, which is basically a non-angel, so, actual senari, secret police of the Senar, who keep senari law in the Ashwind Isles, and then also abroad as well. So, that senari over there is running their mouth about the Crimson King. They make sure that senari isn't saying anything anymore, and they're pretty creative about their methods, So that will be in the near future. So we're on the cusp of that with the Senar, of the Crimson King sending out secret police to go silence his enemies in the distance. Right now, that's pretty much only happening in his homeland. So within the Senari kingdom, when two Senari meet, if they don't know each other, they can generally take a look at each other, what they're wearing, the way that they're dressed, the way that they look generally, kind of how they hold themselves, because there hasn't been a full generation, really, right, since the Sand Senar broke off and became their own people. But it's been long enough. And the psionic tie that the Sand Senar have to the leyliners and the nomadic lifestyle that they live, as opposed to the very opulent life that the Brass Senari live, that values culture and money. Generally, two Senari can look at each other and kind of know what side they're on. And honestly, right now, as far as numbers go, like 80 to 90% of Senar are Brass Senar. It's a very small number of Senar that are Sand Senar. Maybe, like I said, 20%. 10% is maybe Pardon?
They didn't reach Honua yet.
Some of them have, actually. So the area of the Horseshoe Plains, where Ozma made the underground caverns for the Sand Senar to live, those do extend as far as Honua. So, and eventually they will found their own Sand Senar city as well, and that will be actually closer to Honua than I think even Irontown is. Gaidi Prime, it started on the opposite side of Mount Everor, so on the opposite side of the Horseshoe Plains as Honua, so a little farther away. But no, right now, some of the Sand Senar have made it to the city, but, the ones that have, like most Senari, they're traders. They have some goods that the people in their tribe have made, and they're coming to trade them in the city for manufactured goods that, they can't really make in the tribe, and they could go buy without them, but hey, they're luxury items, or they make life easier, so they'll still trade for them. So you do still see some Sand Senar in Honua, but predominantly, they're the Brass Senar. There was an organization called the Sea Whacks, which I think is, it's been founded. Or basically, it's a organization that's founded to wipe out the pirates of the Southern Seas. Lana, in the game, one of the kind of NPCs in the quests, she was once a pirate. She was a pirate that hunted Imperial and Nator, that's serpent people, slavers. And she was given a blind eye by the Consulate. They don't really care. Like, oh, she's hunting slavers. Oh, that dastardly pirate. We'll do what we can. Oh, she got away from us again. But eventually the Sea Whacks, they're not going to stand for that sort of piracy. So they hunted her down and got her on the straight and narrow. But all that aside, before this time, there were actually quite a few Senari pirates, but the Crimson King realized, the spice must flow. We can't have our merchant trade routes being disrupted by these pirates. And they have trade routes in the southern seas that go from the Ashwind Isles to Honua. and to other places in the east as well, like, for example, Manalo. So having those seas clear is very important to them. That's why there's so many so many senari in the Seahawks acting as privateer captains. So it's common to see the brass senar because of that. They're not only captains, but also the crew of those vessels. And then also the merchant traders as well that come in from the city of Brass and the Ashwind Isles. I'd say that 80-20 ratio probably holds still pretty well. I mean, in Honua, it might be something more like a 30-70, you know. But yeah, chances are when you bump into a Senar, more than likely they're going to be a brass Senar who worships the Crimson King. And also more than likely, you know, they're going to talk about the Crimson King because they want to make sure, rather if they are a brass Senar, they want to make sure that you know that they worship the Crimson King. Because who knows, you might be one of the Crimson King's agents in disguise, right? So, yeah. So I think that's plenty, anyways, about the Senar, kind of who they are. But I'm more than happy to answer more questions about them because that's it's still just scratching the surface of everything. So if anyone has questions,
Sorry, I have a quick question. I was thinking about the secret police force and how that all works outside of Honua. Well, no, not outside of Honua, in Honua. I get the feeling that outside of the Isles, wouldn't it be considered at least semi-illegal to have a police force set up purely to take out political opposition to the Crimson King in foreign nations and cities?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely going to be a conflict of interest. So the Brass Hand, and this is an organization that will be established in the near future. So in the next 2 to 4 years. I don't have the exact date planned out for it yet, to be honest, but I've got a little bit of time anyways. They are... I mean, yeah, as far as the question of jurisdiction goes, obviously the consulate doesn't allow competing authorities within the city. That's one of the reasons why the Achaecan camp is outside the city, because they've had problems before with the conflict between the Achaecan's military law and the Honuan consulate. But as Eddie's saying here in chat, yeah, that's why they're a secret police, right? And they're I would say one of the things that gives them a little bit of latitude in what they're doing is that they're probably only going to go after Sennar. And like, as brutal as that sounds, the Honuan consulate is very multi-dimensional. They're looking after a lot of different things, and if the Brass Hand are just going after a couple of Senari here and there, I'm not going to say that's totally beneath the notice of the consulate, right? And that's not what I'm saying at all, because like you were saying, are they going to tolerate another authority in their city just going around and, silencing or worse people? And I mean, the answer to that question is it really worth upsetting the Crimson King? Okay, so we're not saying like all out war, right? He's not disrupting trade. He's not taking out anybody close to the consulate. He's not actually affecting Honua or Honuan politics at all. If he were to target someone that was high up, or something along those lines, then that might lead to some sort of friction, certainly. Like, say you get a player character that's trusted or higher by the Honuan consulate, and they're a Sand Senar, And the Crimson King, like they start saying all these things in character that are like, Crimson King's terrible, I hate him, blah, 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 blah. And they get to the level where the Crimson King takes notice of them. And again, this would be in the future when the brass hand would really be a thing. Because right now, they would just get a lot of dirty looks from some other senar. Maybe a paladin might remonstrate them. But they wouldn't really be, for what they're saying. They would just be shunned and ostracized. And they're one of those filthy sand senar. Go back to the desert where you belong. Just mild hate, just mild bigotry, not all out. I'm gonna kill you yet. So yeah, I think the Crimson King would know this too. He's smart. He knows that as long as he doesn't rock the boat too much, as long as he's very targeted with what he does, that there probably won't be too much pushback from the Consulate. Because ultimately, who pulls the strings on Honua? Who's really running the Consulate? It's the Vahi, it's the Nair, it's some human influence as well, it's some Mer influence as well. But, I mean, the Senar, like, I hate to say it, but they're still a pretty new race when it comes to Honua. Honua was founded like 2,000 years ago. And the Senar as a race are only about 700 years old, and their power has been mostly located in the south and center of Atheros. They haven't had to use Honua to get spice to them until just recently. They've always been able to go, okay, from Gaidi Prime down the Go River by Everor, kind of like through Dwarven territory, then bam, to the Ashwind Isles. But Irontown, that's on the other side, and it can be just as quick to just, get it on the wagon and have it go over to Honua as it can be to have it go down the river. So you have, and also for other materials too. So you have, how to put it? I guess you have this balance between the Consulate and the Crimson King. And remember, the Crimson King intentionally didn't send diplomats to Honua before. Because Honua doesn't allow spice, doesn't allow slavery. A lot of the activities that are considered part and parcel with free trade, commerce, and enterprise in some parts of Atheros, as part of the Bond of the Rising Sun, they don't participate in those things. So, the dwarves, hey, they got a call. So did the Ironhearts, so did the Empire. But Honua never really got that call from the Crimson King when Irontown was founded, and that wasn't unintentional. That wasn't an oversight. Honua may very well, as a result, become a bit of a hotbed for the Sand Senar. And I'll just say that as a preview here, that I very much suspect that sometime in the near future, the next year or two, that there will be some events tied to just that. That there's some Sand Senar refugees that are here, maybe camped outside of town, and their leader is talking loud and upsetting some people and maybe saying some things even that he shouldn't, but the Consulate is overlooking it because, well, they're out there. But then something happens. Complications occur. The situation evolves. And I don't want to pin anything down too soon. But there will likely, in the near future, be that conflict and that friction between the Brass Senar and the Sand Senar, and it will happen here in Honua because the Consulate is a little bit more open. If it were somewhere like, say, maybe even the Bellhold, they just might have a policy that says no talking about any religion besides the Bork, in the city limits or something like that, because they know it causes problems. I'm not trying to say that's a law that they have. What I'm trying to say is a lot of the other places in Atheros, besides the Empire, are monodominant. One race basically runs the show, and they're run by one god figurehead, or they were run by one god figurehead who's left recently or some time ago, and they still follow all of those dictums from that person. So there isn't usually a lot of wiggle room for, yes, you can worship this god here. It's usually more, you worship your god quietly, or you leave, or we lock you up, or we kick you out, or that sort of thing. Honua is an outlier, I would say, in how much religious freedom the consulate gives the people that are there, right? Like there's the Temple of Kane, and there's the Elks Lodge, and there's other places too that aren't don't deserve a whole channel, but they're there as well. Like the arena, right? That's run by the Maquis, and they're also a religious organization. They're a religious organization that bends knee to Kahoali. And the Akaika, I mean, Valaya technically became an avatar within her lifetime, and she still lives. So it's, but I mean, the Akaika are kind of everywhere too, so I can't really say them, but they do have a camp just right outside the city here. Yeah. I guess, oh, hang on a second. Eddie's doing something here. Oh, I'm supposed to ignore it. Okay. Yeah, I guess short story long. Yeah. Oh, hang on. There's a question here. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. Short story long. What would stop any friction from occurring would be the Crimson King keeping from overreaching, and he might be wise enough to keep that sort of thing from happening. He might be conniving enough to know exactly what the line is and where to stop. But his agents, they might make mistakes. So there might be a point where you do have some agents there, or things are happening, and maybe this is one of the reasons why the Crimson King forms the brass hand. I can say right now, the things that are happening with the were-rats, this might be why one of the orders that's in the lore is founded. The actions that are occurring in the game right now. So I think, yeah, it's certainly possible that there will be some sort of conflict between the jurisdiction of the consulate and what the brass hand try to do in the name of the Crimson King. But again, that would be why they're secret, right? They know that that's not what they're supposed to be doing, and that's going to cause a conflict. Will the consulate care? Maybe. It depends on what they're doing, who they take out, if it's worth the consulate's time to start friction with the Crimson King when the senari are such good moneymakers for Honua. So it's a question of, do they want to rock the boat? Does he want to rock the boat? Generally, the answer to both of those questions is no. He benefits from the chaos and instability in other people's relationships, but he wants there to be stability in his own. So, all right. So any other questions about the Senar or the Crimson King?
It's not related specifically to that Crimson King, but all of the religions, all of the races worship one single god, right? That's how we made the world with the point system. There's no multi-ethnic, no, multi-polytheist.
So I would say actually there are some polytheist groups. It's actually a really good question. So thank you for that. The question, I'm pretty sure it's being recorded, but just in case it got dropped or I got it wrong and you can correct me, the question is, it seems that a lot of the races in Atheros are monotheistic in that they worship their creator, or they worship just one avatar adherent to their culture, or according to their culture. Are there any polytheistic races or cultures, or are there any cultures that worship more than one avatar? And I would say the answer to that is yes. So an example of the monotheistic culture would be the Empire, right? They worship whoever is emperor. There might be other avatars kind of like on the side within there, but pretty much all of the worship in that culture goes to the avatar that's in charge. First Glacia, now Varthus. But the Nair, for instance, and I think also the Vahi are another good example. As new avatars came about, they kind of incorporated the aspects of that avatar into their culture. So the Nair, for example, Longma, their creator god, they look to him for, a lot of different things like stability and balance and law. But then they also worship Luna as well. They worship the aspects of Luna like emotion and compassion, and peace, and the duality of human, or I guess I should say humanoid kind. And then also Lessa for, the intellectual depth of the mind and riddles, puzzles, that sort of thing. So there are some cultures that are polytheistic. The Nair are certainly one. That I think. Oh, and also the Golden One too. They also have evil gods that they worship. There's the Golden One and also Sablek. Sablek runs the Imperial Navy, which of course is a part of the Empire, but it's 80% Nerak. It's almost entirely Nerak. So he's kind of almost his own like little sub god within the Nair pantheon of the Nerak, and he's symbolic of strength and ambition and taking what you can and protecting yourself as well from the surfacers and taking advantage of the surfacers when you can. Or I should say the landwalkers, not the surfacers in this case. And then there's the Golden One, just the truly chaotic evil one that drives the minds of different aquatic creatures mad as perfectly formed Nair, I think, just in giant form. And, symbolizes madness. And, pardon? Avarice, greed, yeah, and the other dark, evil parts of the mind. So the Nair, I would say, and I think the Nair are another good example because they were created by Longma, but the Zerat, they were blessed by Luna for their devotion to Luna and made into their own subrace. Every Zerat was, in some way, shape, or form, a devotee of Luna. That was, poof, hey, look at this. You're a Zerat now. You've been blessed by Luna. Or maybe you were like a friend's friend of somebody who got blessed by Luna, and they're like, yeah, we're going to get you in on the deal too. But so the Nair certainly, I think, are a pantheonic, I don't know if that's a word, a pantheonic race, in that they worship, and I'll see if I can get them all here, and I might even be leaving a couple out. Longma, Lessa, Luna, the Golden One, Sablek. I think some also joined the Keepers of the Flame. So I'll put Ahuhitaroa on there as kind of like a asterisk sixth. He's the Y, sometimes Ahuhitaroa. So that's, fully 6 avatars that the Nair worship. And maybe Veshta. Really? Veshta? No, they don't worship Veshta. No, that's ridiculous. But the Vahi also, there's both Kane and Kahoali. Of course, Kane is the patron god of the Vahi, but there's also Kahoali, his twin brother. There's Luna. They also worship Luna as well, who's the daughter of Kane. And then also Ahuhitaroa. He's also a god of the Vahi. So the Vahi and the Nair, I don't know. Maybe it's just more of like an thing with the Eastern cultures over there, with the eastern part of Atheros. But they tend to be more polytheistic. Yeah, the Mer also worship both Lessa and Luna. I'm trying to think if there's any that aren't on the list. Those in the Grand Covenant. The Grand Covenant is, I would actually say, somewhat polytheistic as well. Obviously, Thup is, their number one, but they have many saints as well, like Thubthul. Thubthul was an avatar, but he's considered a saint in Covenant religion. And Carden Rourke, the speaker of the clan's Tharg, saint in the Grand Covenant, in the Covenant culture. So they have like they're still monotheistic in that Thup is the one god. He's the one true trickster god. You know, the one that created them all, and gifted them with sentience and sapience and all that good stuff. But they have a number of saints that they worship as well, like Thubthol, like Carden Rourke, and many others too, like Saint Gustav, for example, the one who defeated Glacia. So I would say that those are probably. Well, you know what? Actually, there's also the Bictural. Well, I guess they really only worship. Well, no, there's more than two, because the Bictural, they worship the Bork, of course. He's kind of like their hero god king who united them all. Think like a good Genghis Khan, back when the human tribes were all just kind of like a bunch of like little kind of like tribal societies where the king owns everything as far as he can see. The Bork went around as an avatar of good. He basically abandoned all his possessions and said, I'm going to just beat people up and say, follow me and do what I say until I've got everybody listening to me. And he did. And so that's just kind of how he did his thing. I didn't make that one. But anyways, so he kind of founded the Bictural, that human territory. But before that, Veshta is the progenitor of humans. And even though she's evil and she enslaved humans for a long time and drank their blood and all that good stuff, she's still their grandma. It's like even if she does all these things and she's super bad, like she still made you. She didn't make you. She made your mom. It's like you still got to give love to your grandma, even if your grandma's a diabolic murderer, butcher, you still got to give love to your grandma. I don't know, just saying. No, of course my grandma isn't that way. Jeez, Megan's looking at me. No, jeez, come on. I'm just saying. All right. Anyways, so the humans, they worship the Bork, of course, as kind of their hero, philosopher, king. But then also they kind of venerate Veshta, I think is a good way to put it. And then there's Yorsh as well, who is a kind of like a great beast, often manifesting itself as a giant elk, which is kind of symbolizes the veil between life and death, so that you see the great beast at the moment of your passing, that kind of thing. So, yeah, the Bictural, they're also polytheistic, but I guess it's really only about those three, because Ilden's mostly, like, people have forgotten about him. Like, some people in the darkest of shadows still worship Ilden, but we're talking, like, number one, you have to be, like, aristocracy to even know his name and know he exists, and then number two, you've got to be, like, truly evil and pretty much still pure-blooded Veshtan human. Which there aren't many of. So Ilden's like, he's not even mentioned, but he's there. He's a part of that human pantheon as well. So the Isran, I wouldn't really say they're polytheistic. Well, the Isran? Oh, the Israns don't worship Luna or Lessa, really. No. The Israns pretty much worship Isra and Herma.
I would think some would worship Lessa too. She was the Manticores and intervened on their behalf a few times.
Okay, maybe some worship. Maybe some Israns worship Lessa. I do have that, I think, as a focus. So I think you're right. Okay, maybe a couple Isran worship Lessa, but I don't know. As a culture, though, would they be considered polytheistic? They're almost more animist than worshippers of any one god. I don't know. Well, Isran are a special bag. They're still from that one part of the continent that's like prehistoric, the Abhan Peninsula. It's the one part that hasn't been like fully colonized, settled, conquered. Yeah. Thanks, Revax.
Nice guy.
Yeah, nice guy. You'd love him. Okay. So that was a great question. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mass.
Oh, this is the lore thing that I was hearing about.
Yes, this is the lore thing you were hearing about. Did you have Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Forgot it existed and thought this was haha funny.
Oh no, that's fine.
Thing. No, I'm gonna mute myself and just listen.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah,
I'll speak up if I think of one.
sure. Yeah, I'll probably only going to go for about another 15 minutes or so. I don't want this to be more than an hour or an hour and a half. I think like 2 hours would be like, whoa, no one's ever going to go back and listen to that stream.
Okay,
So
I got one. What is the reception to most Empire citizens to the slavery?
what was
Commonly accepted?
so yeah. So within the Empire, basically the Empire has two lives. It's just now kind of entering its third life right now. So I think it's appropriate to call it the Ancient Empire. That was founded in the First Era, about like 6,000 or so Third Era. So 8,000 plus years ago. Glacia started raiding the hang on a second here. Glacia started raiding the different territories, I guess. It's not even territories at this time. The different peoples of the First Era. So after this, this continues for about 5,000 years until the god Thup has this brilliant idea, right? Basically, hey, I know how we can take care of this glacier problem. She's flying around, she's eating us, she's telling the Frost Raiders to squish us. We don't like this. We need some way to deal with this glacier. We're going to trick her. So Thup enchants this lake to make it look like it's made entirely of gold and puts a giant, basically an enspelled and an ensorcelled diamond on the bottom. It's irresistible to Glacia. She can't resist it. Like, no matter how hard she tries, she cannot escape the presence of this diamond because she is just so driven by greed and avarice. She wants nothing but wealth, and it is just such a huge, magnificent load that she can't part herself from it. So she instead freezes the lake and the entire area around it, and commands the Thup to kind of construct her a palace of ice, and circles herself around the diamond, and basically stays there for thousands of years. Moves all of her riches, has her riches moved there, so she doesn't have to do anything. Just has a castle called Castle Blatt built around her there, so she can just curl up around the diamond and just stay there. In the meantime, this kind of continues, and over time, the Brook, the Frost Raiders, the one that worship Glacia, they still continue raiding people. They still go around. They keep getting riches. They keep bringing it to Glacia, because they realize, hey, we've got to keep this tribute rolling in here. And it gets to the point where some in, let's say, I guess it would be considered the Covenant at this point. Let me see here. Or is it still Thup? I'm trying to see here when the imprisonment ends. Okay, yeah. So, okay, sorry. So here we go. So that pretty much happens in 3,000 First Era. So that's the first section of it. Let me just put it that way. Initially, slavery in the Empire, they did it because it was the right and just thing. They were the big ones. They were a bunch of frost giants. The Thup were the small ones. Of course the small should do what the big say. And if they don't, I'll punch them until they do what I say. Exactly. It was just kind
They
of,
sound like Warhammer orcs.
yeah, it was a very simple and straightforward philosophy. Like they could get behind what Glacia was saying. This made sense to them. But then Glacia got locked up, and a lot of that kind of brutal society within the Frost Giants, in fact, some of them even sub-raced off. The sub-race got created called the Hill Giants, which were basically a domesticated version of the Frost Giants. They're not large-sized, they're medium-sized, they're not as violent, they're not as visceral, because their society isn't based on violence. Really, the Brook, the Frost Giants that stay that way, are the ones that are raised in that culture, in that society that values strength. And I would say, really, that's what that serves as the foundation of slavery, or at least the justification of slavery in the Empire, is the Brook. Even without Glacia there. When you're out there living on the mountain, on Mount Hadron, where it's freezing cold blizzards all the time, dark monsters living in the dark caves that you're trying to sleep in, and meanwhile, the tribe has to produce a quota of gems and metals for the dragon. If you don't, you're all going to get eaten. It is a harsh, brutal, and bitter life where you don't have a lot of independent choice. You have to do what is necessary for the tribe. And you don't decide what you do. The leaders of the tribe decide what you do. So when the clan leader tells you to jump, you don't even say how high. You just know how high to jump. You just jump, right? It's a sort of, you don't have a choice. Our survival depends on this. And that, I think, is very much the foundation of, like I said, that justification for slavery. You don't have a choice. We have to do this. This is necessary for our survival. If we're going to go on as a people, we must do this. Even once they escape the danger of the mountain, even once they escape the imminent danger of Glacia, it's never enough to simply sit back and be. No, there's yeah. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So the Empire is essentially ruled by God, and that God pretty much goes, do what I fucking say, I'm gonna kick your teeth in.
Yeah. Yeah, and
It's gonna be excited for my plans in the future.
yeah. And that was also basically what happened in the second iteration of it too. So Castle Blatt, more or less, like, it became over time, like since 3000 first era, going forward to about 1200 or 1400 in the second era, it just got covered in ice and snow, and it became a mountain. And it got to the point where there was just a hole in the ground that they dumped gold into. And the idea in the Grand Covenant was, oh, we just have to keep dumping gold in this hole. If we don't dump gold in this hole, then we hear something terrible will happen. There's this vicious dragon. And, of course, people laugh about that, right? Ha, ha, ha. It's been 5,000 years or 4,000 years since anybody's seen Glacia, right? They think, oh, ha, ha, that's just legends, that's myth, that's superstition. There's no dragon. But we keep putting money in the hole because, exactly, but we keep throwing money in the hole. Until one day, finally, a Thargish captain comes in and basically says, oh, no, we're super low on gold, everybody. We don't have any gold left. We don't have any gold left to throw in the hole. And they don't take the problem seriously, and Glacia bursts out. She realizes that her tribute is lacking. And, as nice as that diamond is, she wants to know why the pile of wealth around her is continually getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Because she hasn't been dead all these years. She's just been sitting at the bottom of the lake. And Sorsold promised this tribute, and her tribute got cut off. So she comes back, and she keeps eating people until she gets someone that will listen to her, And she explains to them the situation and what needs to happen. And the situation is pretty much, well, everyone around here works for me now, and you're going to keep getting gold for my hoard. And that was the second iteration of the Empire. At that point, the Brook, the Frost Giants, they held a huge freaking party. And the Frost Raiders went to work doing what they do best, which was going out and capturing slaves. Because the nature and the shape of Atheros is that you have the Horseshoe Plains there, this big U-shaped plain right there in the middle of the continent, which means that the Frost Raiders, even though they mostly live up in the far northwest and also kind of in the plains between that and the Great Rift, the Horseshoe Plains allow them to mobilize and strike almost anywhere in Atheros with lightning speed. And even with magic communication, before you know they're coming, they've already hit you, and they've taken your resources, they've taken your people, and they've brought them back to the Empire. So that was pretty much like the basis of the Second Empire. It essentially just became a giant imperial war machine that was intent on conquering every other person through sheer military force. And when
the dwarven fort only survives because dwarves are really hard to get out of their mountains.
well, the dwarves were content to trade with her, and and also, yes, like you said, they're notoriously hard to get out of their mountains, but also, pardon?
Arms dealers.
Yeah, they were also notorious arms dealers. They were selling arms not only to the Empire, but also to the West. And there's also, you can't really see it. You might be able to see it on the map, but there's the city of Everon Doom, which is kind of in the middle there. There's an underground pass there that allows you to pass through those mountains. So you can, if you're on good terms with the dwarves, get some stuff through the air, get arms and get supplies and iron and so forth through there. But they would never let them march an army through there. They're just smarter than that. And one of the things that protected the dwarves, too, was just, they're not as attractive as a target. Okay, we could delve into the mountains and try to kick these dwarves' butts. Or we could get the humans out there standing in the plains that don't even have a wall. We'd ride, or like Verde Terra in Westgate, that was like, we make this giant Stonehenge around our city. The Frost Raiders just rode between the stones when they took the city. It's like, okay, it's ours now. Here we go. That, or also the Grand Covenant to the south. Like, they're the mortal enemies of the Empire. They're the ones, Stup was the one who all those years ago tricked Glacia. Frost Raiders, the Brooke hate nothing more than a Thup. Just because, like, their stupid little grins and their smiles, and they think that they're in charge, all like, the Brooke love nothing more than a Thup getting what they deserve. It's just like this. It's just this built-in animosity that they have, because all those years ago, Thup tricked Glacia, sent her to the bottom of the lake, and it's one of those things where the Brooke and the Thup, they just don't get along. So, just how weak and squishy and easy to capture the humans are, and their lifelong vendetta with the Grand Covenant. That's why the Empire never really bothered to go after the dwarves. They were just a low priority target. And the dwarves were happy to trade with the Empire too. It was easier to trade gold to them for iron than it was to try to steal the iron from the dwarves. I don't know.
Are you done? I don't want to interrupt you.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. This is actually great information, because Ollie's wife was a dwarf. Nah, I'm role-playing them being enslaved by the Empire. That gives me so many tools to work with right now.
Yeah, so actually, let me tell you a little bit about the dwarves, because they might end up holding an incredible amount of power in the future in Atheros, just in the stuff that hasn't been written yet. So the dwarves have kind of, like the senari, they've kind of just been quietly politically on the back burner, building strength and building power. They just don't have that Crimson King. They don't have that one avatar that really kind of acts as a lightning rod for ambition within the people, but it's almost been their saving grace in a lot of ways. So, anyways, they do now have. Oh, go ahead.
It's a threat, correct?
Yes, exactly.
The saving grace.
Yes, it makes them, because the Avatar makes them a threat, and the actions of the Avatar just kind of set in stone almost a culture for these people. And I shouldn't say a culture. I guess I mean more a history for the people. You know, like avatars almost always stand in conflict with each other. So if you are a people that worships an avatar, you're probably in some ways at conflict with some other people. But the dwarves don't have that. They're kind of everybody's friend, right? They're a neutral party. Everybody likes the dwarves. Everybody can be friends with a dwarf. And in fact, there's that subrace of dwarves in Atheros called the Drook. And this goes back quite a ways. The idea is that there are, within the frost giants, there are master smiths and master miners. And within the dwarves, there's master smiths and master miners. So, I mean, they share culturally a lot of different traits. And they aren't as at each other's throats as dwarves and giants are in other D&D settings. So you have these kind of shared cultural
Cultural understanding.
yeah, exactly. Cultural understandings. Like, I don't want to say, because it almost goes beyond understanding, right? It's a foundation, right? Like, so much smithing and mining, we consider that sort of thing to be foundational to dwarven culture, you know? Like, they do it better than anybody. But so do the frost giants, right? So we kind of, you have almost this competition in a way of, well, who can really do it better? And that competition between the frost giant smiths and miners and the dwarven smiths and miners eventually kind of turned into a friendship. And eventually the Drook race was born. And it was a result of kind of some of those powerful smith clans amongst the dwarves joining in with some of the more powerful tribes within the frost giants and marrying some people across and strengthening the ties. So you have this subrace within the dwarves called the Drook. A lot of them, even the ones who were, regardless of what race their mother was, almost all the time they ended up living with their dwarven parent. Just because dwarven culture is a lot less xenophobic than frost giant culture. Even the frost giant parent is aware of this. So almost all of the time, the Drook child was sent to go live with the dwarven clan, which is why they're considered a dwarven subrace and not a subrace of the frost giant or their own race. So anyways, this happened, a couple hundred years ago, and eventually the frost giants join a group of dwarves who are researching the enigmas of the Endbringers, called the Artificer Brotherhood, and they expand it to call it the Artificer Circle when they include the frost giants. So you have this warming relationship over time, at least in recent history, between the dwarves and the Empire. And
The dwarves and giants, don't they live long? So it does seem like recent to them.
yeah, it does. And I guess the other piece of it is this right now hasn't really happened yet, but like I said, it will be happening soon, and a lot of the dwarven clans can sense this. Since the war has ended, right? Since Glacia has died and Varthus has assumed the throne, there's been a real change politically in how the Empire is run. No longer are they that empire of might that goes around and smashes people on the head. Now they are an empire, truly an empire of provincialdom. So you have...
They still take slaves.
Oh, yes, they still take slaves. Slavery is very much a part of the empire, but you know how the empire... You know what? In the empire, they might have slavery, but they don't have hunger. No one is homeless. Everyone has a purpose. Everyone is part of the greater imperial machine. And you think there's no laws for those slaveholders? There are. But people in the empire, when they get called a slaver like it's an insult, they just shrug. And they think of Yggdrasil or Honua, where there's people starving to death in the streets every day. And they think, you call me a slaver, you think I don't care about people? I care about my slaves more than you care about the people in your city.
I mean, I think they take it a bit more personally if someone who literally had their family forcibly enslaved said it.
Oh yeah. That's the thing. There's so many different shades to it in Atheros. But like that's certainly the imperial line of it is like, hey, you know what? Like, yeah, we have slaves, but everyone here goes to bed warm.
People die, loser.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We everyone here has a purpose. Everyone here is contributing to the greater whole. Yeah. So the dwarves, as the Empire in the near future here start to annex other territories, they will annex the Grand Covenant. And once they do that, and the dwarves start to see the power that the Grand Covenant gains by becoming a part of the Empire, and that, in fact, now they're even able to field candidates for Emperor, the gears in the dwarves' heads are going to continue turning. They will, in the written history, just as it is right now, they will become a province of the Empire. And Deverak, a Drook, someone who's half dwarf and half frost giant, she's going to become the provincial governor of the dwarves. They still have their clans and their clan leader and everything like that, but she's that go-between, the one that ensures that the Emperor's authority and the Emperor's taxes is carried out and paid in the Dwarven holds. So,
This is gonna be fun. I
oh yeah.
have a lot of plans for all to piss off the Emperor. If they're going all powerful, it's gonna be a fun game. I might die at the end, but it'll be fun.
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Empire is definitely turning the tables by with this whole gambit of peace. You know, they've been at war for the last 700 plus years with everybody. But then after Glacia died, Varthus realized, this is our best chance of as a people continuing, as a culture, staying solvent and continuing on and not being divided up by this horde, this rabble at the gates that wants to take everything that we've built up and sunder it. So yeah, it's very interesting. And the fact that it's working too, the fact that he's like within the span of 15 years after the war is over, he has 2 whole new provinces under the sway of the Empire. Glacia, it would take her 100 years and hundreds of thousands of troops just to take a couple of cities. But here, Varthus in 15 years just gets 24 under his sway through just politics. But then with that comes that inherent risk of, now you have a lot of very powerful people in these areas that are gunning for you in your position and the power you have. So, and Varthus is not the most politically adept. He has some good ideas, but he has some advisors that do a lot of the thinking for him. So he's no chump. Anyways. Yeah. But yeah, if you want in the lore, you can look for Deverak. It's Devorak. Okay. Yeah. And that's them. So any more questions? I think I'll probably wrap it up here in a few minutes, unless there are any more questions. I'm not going to say like.
All I have is ideas for memes about Ollie being shamed whenever he sees the Empire being happy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You know what? And you know what? That's the thing. Like there are, I've said this so many times. There are right now in the Empire people whose families were enslaved during the war, taken during the war, and still over there in Imperial territory. And now that the war is over, and the Bork says peace, peace, peace. No, we can't attack the Empire. there's a lot of people that are just not content with that. Their blood is boiling. Like, my sister is still enslaved over there in chains. And
Well, that's
the,
gonna prove
what?
a great opportunity. I already got so many ideas.
Yeah, no, it's great.
Higher levels.
And I'll tell you right now, like, whenever you see a frost giant, a Brook, you are well within, like, your character's background and culture to just instantly, like, I see you and I just hate you. Because internationally, like, Brook, besides serpent people, are probably the ones that are known the most for slavery. The difference, though...
Also personal experiences, too.
Yeah.
Hate them even more. And
Oh, yeah.
if you get to a high-level vengeance paladin, that's probably going to cause some problems.
Yeah, because the Brook, they enslave humans. The serpent people, they enslave Isran and other serpent people. They don't really enslave humans
Certain
much.
people are equality.
Yeah. And zombies, they're not really even doing that many slaves these days. That's different, But the Brook, ugh.
To me specifically, so I don't like it.
Well, and as far as the race's actual advancements, I believe the Empire was advanced in cruelty, while the serpent people were advanced in deception. So, like, literally, the
Certain people are the type to get indentured servitude rather than literal slaves.
Exactly. Yes, they have zombies that do, like, the gross work, but then they have indentured servants to do the work around the house. They don't have to look at the zombie, And it's the indentured servant.
Even though they're objectively evil, they're lawful evil.
Exactly. Yes, they're very lawful.
The Empire's lawful.
Well, the Empire's lawful evil too, but like you were saying, the Empire enslaved his people, so
I
it's
think
different.
they're more neutral evil, if you think about it.
The Empire?
Early days, they were neutral evil.
Hmm.
Then
I
they
don't know.
developed into lawful evil over time.
Well, I would say they've definitely become more lawful over time. Yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. All right.
Now I'm
Did
too
you?
excited, so
Yeah.
I feel like Edel's questions need to be answered at some point.
Oh yes, the question that was in the. Hang on a second. Where did it go? Is it in questions? Where was the question, darling?
There's another thread you haven't done.
Oh, there's another thread. Okay, here we go. Okay, Edel, what are the most popular sports throughout the different races? Ooh, gosh, I know that there are some. I know that we've had conversations about this before. Geez. Okay. Besides the animal racing. Hang on a second. Let me do a quick search in the lore document for sport. Let's see what we come up with.
you remind me of a friend who's written almost on everything in lore.
Let's see here. Jeez. Well, I didn't write all of this stuff. Fortunately, that would be a lot for me.
Like, it's obviously a team effort from you, but I mean, like, in the implication that they write so much that there's almost a topic on everything.
Yeah. Gosh, for the Thup, I don't know if the Thup would really... The Thup don't do sports, but what they do is pranks. For the Thup would definitely be, like, in prank-offs with each other, Like, you would have... If you're a Thup, you've got that friend or that rival that you're in a constant prank-off with, Like, the two of you are like, in a never-ending prank duel with each other, always trying to one-up the other person.
The Empire would be gladiatorial combat.
Oh, yeah. And the Empire's gladiatorial combat. The City of Sword has the biggest arena in all of Atheros. And it actually is a kind of like a picking ground for different lords in the Empire who are looking for bodyguards or this or that. So gladiators who do well in the arena and sword actually can do fairly well for themselves in life if they survive. Let's see, other sport. Jeez, I'm trying to think. Like the Vahi, Chris has talked about the Vahi sports before, and I'm trying to remember what they are. Oh, geez, Chris. I will get back to you on that, Edel. I will do some research on that, and I will let you know. I'll reach out to some of the other people. I'm sure within the Victorall they do the stick and wheel game. Yeah.
You're talking about the one with the wheel and they put a stick in the middle and just run along?
Yeah. Like you try to keep poking the wheel with the stick and keep it moving. Yeah.
Rolling.
Yeah. Hoop rolling, that's what it's called. Yeah. All right, the current popular fashion trends in Honua. Let's see. I would say that probably like the Covenant robe is in right now. So like lots of whites and golds. It's also like the Veshtin look because the Covenant, like it's right now, at least in Atheros, it's all about the money and the bling. Because one of the things that came along with the peace as of 15 years ago was Varthus basically said, hey, the war is over, but also, you know, all that money that Glacia's been taking from everybody for thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years? He opened the vaults and he started distributing it to everyone in the world. So basically, it's this payoff, peace for money. So there's money rolling into a lot of these different, you know, sovereignties in Atheros. Everybody who everybody who signed up for peace with the Empire is getting a lot of money. So golden neck stretchers, yeah, totally. There you go. Absolutely. So right now, I would say the popular fashion trends in Honua and are probably the same for a good deal of Atheros, but Honua, they tend to be especially cosmopolitan. Stuff that's really showy, you know, really gaudy. I'm trying to think Honua specifically at this time. Honua doesn't know it yet, but it's very soon going to be hit by more of Ozma's tricks, and Ozma's tricks kind of keep moving in that direction. So colors that clash as well, and kind of like odd stylistic choices or very loud pieces. Those are probably very popular right now too. Kind of it's visual chaos. Yeah. You know, the idea is they've all been their own separate races and entities for so long, and now there's so much trade and there's so much more travel, and the war is over, and of course we mourn for those who have been lost in the war and those who have lost things in the war. But hey, it's a party! Everybody has money now! Woo! Party! It's more just
collapses.
Well, I mean, that would only happen if the Empire's payout stops. So as long as no one goes to war with the Empire, everything's fine.
Yeah,
They could by centralizing the main income supply from them.
Yep.
What happens when the Empire runs out of money from the vaults?
It will take a long time because I mean that's like 10,000 years of extortion by Glacia. It's gonna take a long time, but yes.
Yeah, but what does happen at the end?
They'll figure that out when it happens.
Pretty much every problem will happen.
Yeah, exactly.
What the Avatar said after he threw Glacier down to the hole.
Yep, exactly. That's
Let's find out later. Not a problem.
Gold reserves are dangerously low. It's exactly what happened the last time. It's exactly what's going to happen the next time. I refuse to believe that they're going to somehow learn from history and it's not going to repeat itself. They're going to do the same thing now. It's that same now for later thing that just, you know, we humans do it. People in Atheros do it. Hey, it'll be fine now. We'll deal with the problem later. And, you know, later, who knows what will happen. At least in, like, the immediate near future, I suspect eventually the Empire's power creep has to slow down. But it's hard to visualize when exactly that's going to happen because they're doing a dang good job at what they do. Like there's certain sovereignties that will just never bend knee to the Empire. But there's a lot of others that are seeing the advantages. Yeah, you know, like the Borkdom. But I mean, gosh, I wouldn't say even the Borkdom is kind of, yeah.
I'm gonna lie, I thought you said Borg, like Star Trek.
Oh, the Borg, the Borgdom.
Over there. This is Borg would be like.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd say that those are probably the visual chaos. That's the kind of the popular fashion theme in Honua right now. All right, so let's see here.
Vampire man is all I can think about when you say gold is the fashion theme. In Warhammer 40k, the Imperium, they like gold.
Oh yes, yes, they like gold.
They love gold. The golden throne filled with the golden castle.
Oh yeah, and well, there's gold. What do you call it? Like embellishment on pretty much everything.
Yeah, pretty much.
All right here.
What might do with the fact that their god emperor wore gold.
Oh yeah, gold on everything too, all over the armor.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm looking for the title of somebody here. Masawa asked a question. It was Oh, hang on, somehow I just keep on losing this thread. Yeah, I guess I should probably stop this soon here.
Yeah, it's about how are laws made or justice handled in the city.
Yeah, so let's see. Martial law or other trials, so handled by whom, based on the laws who were made by whom. Right, okay. So the laws in the city ultimately all come from the Honuan Consulate. The Consulate is a body of 5 individuals. Each one of them oversees different parts of the city and has different ministers that work for them. Each of those ministers runs, or at least what's like the high ministers, they run a ministry. Those ministries are responsible for carrying out those laws. So, for example, the city planning office, that's a ministry. The the Ministry of Free Blades, that's a ministry as well. Consular Atua, she's one of the 5 consulars on the conduit. On the consulate rather. She holds a lot of power in the city. She has a lot under her direction. So if there's one single most powerful person in the city, it's probably Consular Atua. But aside from the people on the consulate and their ministers, there are also, gosh, I'm trying to remember the title of this person. I bet it's in Visals if I scroll up enough, maybe. Or if I look for the person's name. Hang on a second. Let me see if I can find their name again. I'm checking my list of NPCs here. Unless Masawa, you happen to remember the title of the person that made your will? Oh, he went to dinner. He's not here. Oh, that's okay. I'll forgive him this time. Okay, let's see. It's a long list of NPCs. I'll get there.
People to meet and befriend.
Yes. Oh, and there's we got a big boost to the list too with all of the Undercity NPCs. That put a lot on the list. And also, for some reason, it doesn't just put them.
I do have one question. I just thought.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Is there the other minor monstrous races in existence, like kobolds, goblins, etc., or do they just not exist?
Oh yeah. Actually, that was one of the things that was on the list of things that I was going to address. So, kobolds do exist. As far as the other monstrous races, so if the way that we made Atheros was that. Oh, okay, that's fine. You can listen to this later. So the way we made Atheros was that we decided there wouldn't be any races that you could play unless we spent points to make them. So any races that would be considered like a playable monstrous race, for example, the kobold, you could not normally play unless it was created as a playable race. Now, the kobold was created as a playable race. However, it has not yet been released in Honua yet. That being said, if there are other monster races, like not necessarily the playable monstrous races, but other monsters, like an owl bear, right? Are there owl bears in Honua or in Atheros? Yes, there are. Are there Pegasi in Atheros? Yes, there are. Now, they might not necessarily be here in Honua. They might not necessarily be right here around the city. But the D&D monsters, the ones that you find in the monster manual, and also the planar monsters, like the ones from the astral plane and everything like that, and devils and demons, they exist. Don't ask why there's not tieflings. So, I said don't ask why. Don't tell why either. Don't ask, don't tell. All right. Anyways,
Why do tieflings not exist?
shh, dang it. Yeah. See what you did. See what you did, Eddie. All right. So yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Gosh, I'm looking for the name of this person. I can't find it anywhere. I'm just gonna scroll up in Visals because I know that's where it was. And how long ago could it have been, really? Well, actually, not that long. Okay, here we go. Okay. Secretary. All right, so the consulate makes the laws in Honua. Consulars are the name of the 5 people that are in charge of the consulate. Ministers are the people that work under them at the ministries that execute those laws and enforce them. High ministers are the people in charge of those ministries. And I said it, secretary. That's the name of an attorney, right? Or a lawyer, someone who would represent your interests. Those are called secretaries. So they can write up legal documents. If you are being accused of a crime and you're going to be seen by a defense minister so that they can ask you questions and talk to you about your case, you would speak with a secretary, or rather a secretary might help you to represent yourself, if, of course, you can afford one. A lot of folks in Honua probably can't, and they just get told by the minister what's going to happen. But if you can afford a secretary, a lawyer, then you probably have one. But let me go back and take a look at the question again. Let me make what? No. What do you think this is? The Empire? Okay, so how are laws made and justice is handled? Yeah, so the consulate makes the laws, the ministry enforces the laws, or the ministries enforce the laws, and they probably also, they might even create like small sub-laws too, you know, like if there's this thing that's going to be a waste of the consulate's time and it is, you know, an enforcement act that is needed to go along with the spirit of the law, then they might just do it. And, you know, if the consulate bugs them about it, they'll deal with it later. But most of the time, the law has been written by the consulate, and it's worked pretty well for the last 2,000 years. Changes to the law are fairly rare in Honua, but they do happen. So the consulate handles the law, and then if there's any law breaking that happens, then your case is overseen by a justice minister. If you can afford a secretary, then great, buy one. If you can't, then sorry. Okay, and I think I will probably leave it there unless there's any more burning questions from the audience, just because I don't want this to be
Why don't
2 hours.
tieflings exist?
Because no one spent points on them. Because
I'll get points and spend points on tieflings just to fight everyone.
you can't get points. The Dawn of Worlds game is over. But a legitimate reason, a legitimate in-game lore-friendly reason, because this is the lore call, would be that about 150 years ago, until about 70 years ago, there was a full-scale fiendish incursion in Atheros that took over one city, destroyed another, and threatened to destroy a third. So I mean, like, not, oh, we have a portal here. No, like an entire city for decades is under the sway of a devil and those that are following him. And it took the the Atherosians 70 years to root these devils out. So, I mean, that I think would be one legitimate reason why there's no tieflings in the lore. It's pretty brutal, but there you go. It's a very recent memory. Hey, your baby is born this way. We give it to the priests. Yeah, pretty much. You know, you say a prayer and you give it to the priest. Exactly. Especially when there's other races that have had points spent on that I want to introduce, like the kobolds and like the Tharg and like kobolds.
Kobolds are 10 best race. Like kobolds.
Yeah, I know. All right. Okay, well, I'm going to guess that's the end of the questions then, unless anyone has anything else really quick before we conclude.
No, I just need to write down my introduction of Holly setting up his shit in Haven.
Nice. All right, well, I'll let you get to that. I'll end the call for now and get on uploading this. Talk to you all later. Bye, everybody.
See ya. Bye.